Most people fear being ignored more than they fear being disliked. To be disliked at least means you were seen. But to move through life unnoticed, to speak and feel your words fall flat into the air, to sense that nothing about you leaves a quiet imprint on the room, this is a deeper kind of anxiety. And so people try to solve it the obvious way. They become louder, more impressive, more visible. They speak faster, achieve more, accumulate signals of success that say, "Look at me, recognize me." But strangely, the people who are most quietly admired rarely behave this way. They possess something different, something subtle, a habit so quiet that it often goes unnoticed, even by the person practicing it. And yet, this single habit changes the psychological atmosphere around them. People feel it, they trust it, they respect it, even if they cannot explain why. Modern culture rarely talks about this. Our era worships visibility. We are taught that influence comes from attention, that admiration comes from performance. Social platforms reward the loudest expression of identity. Workplaces celebrate constant output. Even conversations have become competitive arenas where people wait for their turn to speak rather than truly listening. The message is clear: be interesting, be impressive, be unforgettable. But in the process, something deeper is lost: the ability to simply be present without needing to prove anything. And paradoxically, this quiet presence is exactly what draws people towards someone. Not because it is flashy, but because it is rare. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this process, what Jung called individuation, is not loud. It does not look impressive on the surface. In fact, it often appears almost invisible, because the real transformation is internal, a shift in how a person inhabits themselves. And when someone begins to inhabit themselves fully, something subtle changes in the way others experience them. They stop trying to extract approval from the room. Instead, they bring a quiet psychological stability into it. This is the silent habit that people admire. Not forced calm, not emotional suppression, but a steady inner relationship with oneself. A person who practices this habit does something rare in modern life. They pause, they observe, they respond slowly rather than react quickly, and this single pattern reshapes how people perceive them. To understand why this habit creates admiration, we need to explore the psychological shifts behind it. Because inner composure is not a personality trait. It is the result of several deeper transformations, three in particular. Many people live with an invisible pressure, a sense that every interaction must prove something. They must appear intelligent, they must be liked, they must win the conversation. This urgency leaks into behavior, interrupting others, over-explaining ideas, reacting defensively to disagreement. But when someone develops inner composure, this urgency fades. They no longer treat every moment as a test of identity, and because of that, they move differently. They allow silence in conversation. They listen without immediately preparing a response. They ask questions not to control the direction of dialogue, but to genuinely understand. At first glance, this might seem passive, but psychologically, it has a powerful effect. People feel safe around someone who is not trying to dominate the interaction. The nervous system of the room relaxes, and this is where admiration begins quietly forming, because most people rarely encounter someone who is comfortable enough with themselves to slow down. Imagine a small scene, a group conversation at dinner, everyone talking over each other, filling the air with opinions, and then there is one person who simply listens, not awkwardly, not withdrawn, but attentively. They speak less, yet when they do speak, their words land with unusual clarity, because they are not reacting impulsively. They have been observing the deeper rhythm of the conversation. This kind of presence feels different. People notice it instinctively, even if they cannot explain why. Jung believed that much of human behavior is driven by what he called the shadow, The hidden parts of ourselves we try to avoid: insecurity, envy, fear. When people are unconscious of these elements, they project them outward. They become easily offended, quick to judge, defensive when challenged. But when someone begins to confront their shadow honestly, something changes. They stop needing to defend a perfect image of themselves. They can admit mistakes without collapsing. They can hear criticism without immediately attacking back. This psychological stability creates a strange kind of magnetism, because most people secretly struggle with fragile identities. They feel they must constantly maintain an image. But someone who has faced their shadow is no longer performing perfection. They are simply real. And reality, when it is calm and grounded, commands a quiet respect. Picture another moment. Late evening. A person sitting alone in their living room after a difficult conversation earlier that day. Perhaps someone criticized them at work. Most people would replay the moment endlessly, defending themselves in imaginary arguments. But instead, this person pauses, they reflect, they ask themselves, was there any truth in what was said? Not with self-hatred, but with curiosity. This small internal act, facing discomfort rather than escaping it, slowly builds inner composure, and over years it transforms a personality. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, wrote that human beings are not primarily driven by pleasure or power. We are driven by meaning. And meaning emerges when a person lives according to values deeper than social approval. But modern life often traps people in the opposite pattern. Identity becomes dependent on validation, likes, compliments, recognition. Without these signals, people feel invisible, so they constantly seek reassurance. Yet this dependence subtly repels admiration, because admiration grows where self-possession exists. When someone no longer needs constant validation, their presence changes. They speak because they have something to say, not because they need applause. They help others without advertising it. They remain steady even when no one is watching, and paradoxically, this is when people begin noticing them most. Because there is something deeply compelling about a person who is not chasing attention. Consider a quiet scene, a hospital waiting room late at night. The fluorescent lights hum softly. A man sits beside an aging parent. No phone in his hands, no dramatic display of emotion, just quiet presence. He adjusts the blanket, pours a cup of water, sits patiently. Moments like these rarely appear on social media. They earn no applause, but they reveal character, and the people who witness them never forget. Admiration often grows from these unseen acts. Perhaps the most overlooked dimension of inner composure is the ability to tolerate silence. Silence reveals the self. Without constant noise or distraction, a person begins to encounter their own thoughts, regrets, hopes, fears. Many people avoid this. They fill every empty moment with stimulation. But those who learn to sit in silence develop something rare, a deeper familiarity with their own psyche. Nietzsche once wrote that all great thoughts are conceived while walking. The idea behind this observation is simple. Clarity emerges when the mind is not constantly reacting. And when someone has spent years cultivating this relationship with silence, their speech changes. Their words become fewer, but heavier, more precise, because they arise from reflection rather than impulse. And people feel this difference immediately. You may have noticed this in certain individuals: an older teacher, a thoughtful grandparent, a quiet colleague. They do not rush to fill every pause, and somehow their calm becomes contagious. The room settles around them. This is not dominance, it is psychological gravity, a center of inner balance that others instinctively recognize. As life moves forward, this habit becomes even more meaningful, because aging has a way of stripping away superficial identities. Careers change, children grow up, social roles fade. Eventually, each person is left with a quieter question: who am I when nothing external is proving my worth? This is where the deeper journey begins. The habit of inner composure, cultivated slowly through reflection, shadow integration, and freedom from validation, becomes a form of psychological shelter. It allows a person to remain whole, even as external structures shift. And perhaps this is why people admire it so deeply, because somewhere inside themselves, they long for that same inner stability. Imagine the final scene, a house that has grown quieter over the years. Photographs on the wall, memories layered into the furniture. An older person sits near a window in the late afternoon light. The world outside continues rushing. News, trends, endless opinions. But inside the room there is calm, not emptiness, completion, a life that has gradually become more honest with itself. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It is the result of decades of small internal decisions, moments of reflection instead of reaction, acceptance instead of denial, meaning instead of approval. And when people encounter someone who carries this quiet depth, they feel something difficult to describe: respect, trust, admiration, not because the person tried to impress them, but because the person became real. So the silent habit that makes people secretly admire you is not a technique, it is a way of living. The habit of inner composure, of pausing before reacting, of confronting your shadow instead of projecting it, of seeking meaning rather than validation, of allowing silence to shape your thoughts. Over time, this quiet discipline transforms the self, and when the self becomes grounded, something remarkable happens. You no longer need to chase admiration. It begins to appear naturally, in the subtle way people listen when you speak, in the trust they place in your presence, in the calm that forms around you without effort. Not because you demanded attention, but because you became someone who no longer needed it. If this reflection resonated with you, share it with someone who appreciates deeper conversations about the mind and the human journey. And subscribe for more explorations into psychology, meaning, and the quiet transformations that shape a life.